lead person here at FixUS North Carolina, which is a subsidiary of the FixUS movement that's been, and Mike Murphy will share more about that with you. This is the second in our series on civility, and we invite everyone to participate in the conversation, but you must be committed to having a civil conversation around the issues, because we're picking hot topics to discuss, because the only way we can make change is by understanding each other's positions in a calm and civil way, and then working from where we have similarities of thought and then take action on those. America needs us now to be civil and be engaged in civil engagement. America needs us now to understand what America means so that we can move forward. And so I am excited about this second series we have. We have with us Major Jason Howk, retired from the U.S. Army, to talk to us about religious tolerance and Islam. And he has done great work in this area. I encourage you to send us questions and comments around his presentation, and we will address them at the end. Right now, I'm going to pass this on to Mike Murphy to share more with you about FixUS and about our program today. Mike?
Stella, thank you so much. Thank you to all of you in North Carolina for joining us today. So Stella said, I'm Mike Murphy. I am director of FixUS, which is a project of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, launched earlier this year. And we are focused on what I call sort of the meta issue of the day. It's how are we going to deal with our hyperpolarization, our partisanship, our distrust in our political system, so we can tackle a range of challenges in this country. An enormous task, but we are heartened by the volunteer efforts of folks like Stella in North Carolina and folks joining her chapter and others in chapters around the country as we build a community of folks that wants to engage with us on this critically important issue. There's a lot we're doing at FixUS. I'm not going to use this time today to get into that. I encourage people to check out our work at fixusnow.org. But now I want to turn it over to the purpose of today's program. Really appreciate Stella helping organize this today and having Jason Howk join us. Jason will tell you all a little bit about his background. Jason served in the military, and of which we are incredibly appreciative of his service to our country. But he has spent the last few years on the topic of religious tolerance, and particularly educating people on his experience in the military and how it pertains to a better understanding and civil dialogue over religious issues, particularly with people of the Islamic background and better understanding the Islamic faith. So we're really appreciative to have Jason with us today. I'm going to give a little bit sort of housekeeping here on the logistics here for the event today and what we're going to do. So Jason has joined us remotely here. Jason has a little bit of issues on the video, so he's going to just speaking over audio. He's going to have a slide deck he's going to pull up and give a short presentation for a few minutes here. And then we're going to open it up for dialogue and Q&A. As Stella said, we want to have as much Q&A and comments we can get in here. Please use the chat feature. We've had a couple of people send in stuff in advance, but the chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom, you should see that. Just start writing in questions throughout. Please use the chat feature. I'm going to be looking at it, and then when we get to Q&A, I'm just going to curate the questions we got in there and tee them up for Jason to answer. So please use that chat feature for Q&A. One more housekeeping item. We are recording this session. It's also being broadcast live on Facebook Live for folks in North Carolina for our chapter there. So just note we are recording this session so we can share it with folks who were not able to join us today. With that, it's my pleasure to welcome Jason to this event and to turn it over to him. Thank you, Jason, for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. And Ben, if you can throw up the first slide there, that'd be great. Perfect. So hopefully everybody can see that. Sorry you can't see me. My Wi-Fi went down right before we got ready to launch. So I'm hotspotting off my phone, and I hope this is enough signal. I start with this first slide, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a moment. But I use this slide when I wander around America and talk about Islam, and I've been doing this for about 5 years now. And the reason I start with this slide is there are two big questions that I get about Islam. If it's a religion of peace, why is it so violent? Or why is the Islamic religion so violent? Those are the two big questions I get all the time. And I got this great quote from a friend of mine who helped me when I was translating and interpreting the Quran into English. And I almost didn't publish it. And we started talking about some of the issues surrounding talking about religion in America and talking about Islam in particular. And I told him, and I always get this question, and he said this to me, and it made so much sense, and it set the audience up for a better discussion, that we're not going to talk about Islam being a religion of peace or being a violent religion. It's just a religion. We're going to just talk about it, and it takes a lot of that out of it. So you can pop to the next slide. So, nope, we missed one there. There we go. So as I mentioned, I've been was in the Army for about 23 years. I retired about 5 years ago. I was in Afghanistan, an Islam specialist, and that's what I studied and focused on. And I did a lot of training and practice in conflict resolution since about 2002. So I've really been looking at how to tear apart problems that we have and figure out solutions to them that help both sides feel like they are a winner in the discussion. Because if it's a zero-sum game and only one person wins or loses, you never get to solutions. Everybody just postures and you never start talking. So as I said, about 5 years I've been traveling America talking about Islam. 2 years I've been podcasting about it internationally, and I bring on Muslim guests from around the world at my podcast. So I've had a lot of experience talking about very difficult topics, and that's what I wanted to work through today. Really, my lessons from holding over 200 discussions in person, and even more discussions through the internet. And then on top of those lessons, I wanted to show you quickly how I give a presentation on Islam and what I talk about. And I just pulled out 5 or 6 of the big slides that I use to help people think about Islam and understand it in an easy way. And then we'll talk about the lessons. So don't try to read all the slides. We actually are going to email you a PDF of these slides so you can have them to study at your leisure. And I'm just going to talk through some of these quickly. So go ahead to the next slide. So when I start talking about Islam, I really give them these 3 big buckets to think about. I want them to think about Islam, the religion, in green. A religion, just like every other religion, it's a faith system. I ask people to make room in their brain to talk about a political ideology called Islamism. Think communism, socialism. You see ism on the end of the word. That's a political ideology that uses the religion of Islam as its foundation. And then I ask them to think about groups like ISIS, and I put that in quotation marks because every decade we get a new group out there that is an Islamist group, but they want to get to their political aims through violence. And it's a very old ideology. The Khawarij ideology goes all the way back to the original split, the sects that formed inside of Islam. Before there was Sunni and Shia, there were the Khawarij. They're the first people to kind of leave the mainstream religion, and they used violence and a very radical view of their religion to spread it. So these are the 3 big buckets that I ask people to make in their brain, and we're going to talk about different pieces of it. And you store them separately because that's how you need it's easier to understand it. So go ahead to the next slide. All right, this is a quiz I give every audience. I have given this to over 200 audiences. Very easy one. Give me the percentage. How many of these people are terrorists and how many of them are American patriots? I usually give people 20 seconds. I'll ask you to think about it. I'm not looking at the chat option right now, and you don't need to answer it. But think about that question. I usually get either 100% terrorist, 50% terrorist, 0% terrorist, And I'll hear people start saying the names. Oh yeah, Osama, that's Osama bin Laden. And the real truth to this question is really, you can't tell. These are first names, but we've been so conditioned in America that we see a Muslim or Arabic or Persian sounding name, we think terrorism. And that's just a bias that we have in our brains. In reality, this is a bunch of first names. You have no idea who they are. I made the list, so I know that 50% of them are actually American patriots. One of them is has served in the U.S. military and in federal law enforcement and earned a Medal for Valor on the battlefield. So they're all first names. That's really the point of this type of a pop quiz. And you can create this for any topic you're talking about, just to get people thinking about their own biases. Next slide. I always make sure I throw in a lot of facts when I talk. One of them, people always ask me, how big is Islam? This is the 2012 data that we have. It's the most current data. 1.6 billion, it's probably 1.7 billion today. It is the second largest religion. Estimates would tell you, because Islam is the fastest growing religion, mostly through childbirth, not through conversion. They have more children on average in a Muslim family than in non-Muslim families. So they are growing faster. And in about 3 decades, 4 decades, they will be the largest religion through growth. I think that actually is a false assumption. I think that non-religious bucket is going to be the biggest group of faithful people, which is non-faithful people. It is truly a fast-growing issue, and a lot of people still claim to be religious but aren't anymore. So, next slide. People always ask me where the Muslim world is. So I use this map to describe that, well, there isn't a Muslim world. This is where most Muslims live in the world, across North Africa and the Middle East and up into Asia and across the Pacific. But there are Muslims in every country in the world. The dark green is the Shia, which is the smaller sect. Probably 15% of Muslims in the world is Shia. That's a little bit different than the larger Sunni faith that surrounds them. So that's how I talk about the Muslim world. Next slide. When you look at growth rates, as we discussed earlier, those countries in yellow are less than 50% Muslim. Those in green are 50% or more. So the yellow countries are at least 10% Muslim right now. They will be the ones growing the fastest in Muslim populations. So when you think about growth areas, that's where it will be in the world. And yes, there's one in the Americas, that's Suriname. A lot of people came there from India. India has a large Muslim population. So next slide. I ask my audiences when I show this slide, what do the dark red areas show us? And those dark red areas are a bad thing, I will tell you. And red is the worst cases, yellow is less, and green is still a case, but it's not as extreme. And I get a lot of different guesses. The truth to this is the red are terrorist incidents. And this is about the last 45 years of terrorism in the world. If you look at some of those red areas in Northern Ireland and Central and Northern South America, I use this to help people think, hey, there is terrorism. There's a lot of different reasons for terrorism. A lot of the terrorism we see today is based on Islamism, trying to get to that political ideology through violence. But if you go back, 3 or 4 decades, Central South America, hot spots, Northern Ireland, hot spot, has anything to do with Islam, has to do with a lot of other issues. So there are a lot of reasons for terrorism. That's just a way to kind of demonstrate that. Next slide. I always make sure I leave people with the strategy of a terrorist group. I've used ISIS these days. I do want you to read this slide. This is important. If you've never read the ISIS strategy or mission statement, this is how they think of the world. So a violent Islamist is going to put his political ideology into place by killing you if you don't agree with him. And the majority of people that ISIS has killed so far are Muslims. And you need to understand that. That's an important piece of how a violent Islamist group thinks. Everybody is the enemy if they don't agree with you. It has nothing to do with them being Muslim or not. It's are they the right kind of Muslim? So next slide. Then I start talking about the Quran and Islam more in general as a religion. I open up a lot with discussions about its connection and disconnections with terrorism, because that's where a lot of the questions lie. But then I always ask them this question, who's in the Quran? And most people tell me they have no idea what the Quran is about or who's in the Quran. And this is one of those cool word clouds that shows you who the most popular characters are in the Quranic story. And Moses is the most popular. I think he's mentioned 130 something times. I translated the Quran, so I know the story of Moses forward and backwards. We went through it a lot as I went through chapter by chapter. Jesus is, if you look on there, you'll notice that Muhammad's name is not up there. If you cut off at, about the top 30 names or more, he is not the person mentioned more. Mary has her own chapter. Joseph has his own chapter. So if you know the Bible, you know what's in the Quran, you just don't know it yet. Next slide. And then I always get questions about what are the messages in the Quran. So I kind of summarize the major messages. If you've ever read a religious text, you will be familiar with almost every one of these messages. You've seen it in another religion. Forgiveness, always going to be in there. The oneness of God, faith in God, your community, your codes of conduct, your commandments, what's heaven, what's hell, how does Judgment Day work, the creation stories, all of that is in the Quran. As I said, if you've read the Bible, you know a lot of the messages in the Quran. Next slide. There are controversial verses. There are verses that you could take word for word out of context, and groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban do this on a daily basis. And they can take this small little phrase, most of them out of the mid chapters here, you see 47, 49, the middle of the book, there's 114 chapters or sections. And that's what they will explain to young people that have never read the Quran or don't know anything about it. When you meet an unbeliever, you strike them on the neck. They don't tell you the context of this. Unbelievers in the Quran were idol worshipers that lived in Mecca. They weren't Christians or Jews at the time. Those were considered fellow believers. That is an easy way. That's where you get the cutting of the necks, talking about if you die in God's way, you go to paradise. They can use that to tell a suicide bomber to kill himself, he goes to paradise. And the last one is the most controversial. It's that you can question another's faith if you don't think he's struggled enough in his life for God. You can judge, you can question somebody. And ISIS and the Khawarij ideology is all about this idea. I can question everyone, including other Muslims, to see if they're my kind of Muslim. And so that's what opens the door to a lot of that Muslim on Muslim violence. Next slide. I always get asked what my favorite verses are, and these are the ones that jumped out at me as I went through the Quran. Choose to forgive. God rewards you best for forgiving, and the most courageous way to act is to be patient and to forgive. Those ideas of forgiveness are not known to most people that haven't read the Quran, but they jumped out at me, and that last one really sticks out to you, that the most courageous way. There's no way to misinterpret that. The most courageous way to act in your life is to be patient and forgive. That's a pretty good message, but most people are unfamiliar with it. Next slide. And this is the current U.S. policy. And after this, we'll jump into the lessons I've learned. But I usually end with a discussion of where we are in America as we talk about terrorism, as we talk to Muslim nations. This is the last speech that was given kind of on Muslim foreign policy or foreign policy towards Muslim majority nations. This is from May of 2017. U.S. wants peace. We've looked at the issues. We're not here to lecture you. We're only here to assist you. America can't counter these extreme views of Islam like ISIS are holding. That is up to Muslims. It's not going to be done through the military. This is an ideological battle. We need to talk about it. Our children shouldn't be radicalized or terrorized. We need to act as one. America has no ability to drive, terrorists or extremists out of the Middle East. It has to be done somewhere else. So that's kind of where we stand as U.S. policy towards these bigger issues. And that's where I wrap it up, and then I go into a Q&A. So let me hit some of the lessons now on the next slide. So during the Q&A, I pick up a lot of lessons. I usually had somebody taking notes for me, which I would highly suggest if you're talking to audiences, have a note taker that that helps you remember what was going on and learn lessons. Biggest thing for me, is stereotyping. And I think that ruins a lot of our conversations. It takes the civility out of it. There's a big stereotype that Americans hate Muslims. And I haven't found that to be the truth. There are a lot of people that don't know anything about it, but once they hear some facts, they go, okay. So if you go into an audience and you make an assumption about them and how they think, you're really going to mess up your discussion. So I always like to just go into the audience without a bias of what I think the audience thinks. I just give my talking points and I start taking questions. And that's when I learn more about the audience. Everybody does it. You know, you name it, consciously and unconsciously, people are going to be stereotyping each other. It's not just a one-way thing. So that is something you need to be aware of. I have found that it is not useful to walk in and call somebody a bigot and tell them you're here to help them to not be a bigot. That is not the best way to have a conversation that's civil, but people do it all the time. They walk in and say, you know, I know a lot, you don't know anything, and everything you know is wrong. And if you think that way, you're not a good person. So let me set you straight. You know, I read editorials like that every day in America, and it's not a helpful way to make anybody change their mind. And then the last one, you know, I think there's a lot of biases where we think that conservative audiences are not receptive to these conversations. And I have found the opposite. It was usually, you know, so-called liberal groups that said they don't want to have the conversations. There's a bias against a new voice or a new approach to any issue. It's hard to get on the radar. And that hurts our discussions in America if we just don't want to hear from anybody that we don't think we're going to agree with, even though that's usually not the case. Next slide. Politics. I make it a point, and I know a lot about politics. I teach it. I have a political science background. I've worked in DC, in and out of the White House, State Department, Pentagon, Capitol Hill. I got it. I don't talk about it when I give my discussions. I don't mention political partisan issues, and I don't take any questions that get political. I'll just throw the question out and move on to the next person. I don't want politics to derail a discussion that's really important. But people love to do that. They love to bring up how they personally feel about a current president or a current congressman, and it's just not helpful. If you do that, I think you alienate at least 50% of your audience if our voting records are accurate. You know, you are losing 50% of your audience the second you bring up a political person, because you're not going to say something that makes everybody happy. So I just say stay away from it. Don't let your speakers get political. Don't let your audience get political. They take away our ability as a nation to build bridges. It will shut down the conversation instantly. I've seen it time and again. And so that is one of my strict rules, and it works pretty well. I do that in my teach classes as well in different schools. So next slide. You got to be unbiased. If you want to give one of these talks, you've got to be unbiased, and you've got to talk about it without your feelings getting involved. If you're there to build bridges and to make people more tolerant, you know, it is important that your audience doesn't know exactly where you stand. And I have been called every name you can think of. I know my audience usually has no idea where I stand because they ask me, and they're always trying to figure out. They'll follow me in the parking lot and ask me, well, what do you really think about this? So I'm not here for that. I'm just here to give you information and let you think about it and reflect on it and figure out where you want to be. I think that's more important. So that messenger matters as well. And I'm not, I'll tell you, I'm not Muslim, but I don't usually tell my audience that. That messenger, they matter. You can talk to different people about different issues if you're not so tied up in the issue and so emotionally invested in it that it makes you upset or biased. And we have that problem when we talk about religion. We usually just have the same people talking in an echo chamber. They don't go out and speak to the audience that really needs to hear it. And so that's why I think having different messengers is important in a civil discussion. Next slide. And then the last one is really just about the issue of tolerance. I think it's the most important thing if you're going to really focus on making us have constructive conversation. The role of you is to get people to think about tolerance. And it has to go in every direction. We get a lot of folks who think they're being tolerant or other people need to be tolerant, but it doesn't have to be reciprocal. And I think that kills us. There are a lot of extreme voices out there, and I've found this as you can imagine, talking about Islam, that don't want us to have civil conversations. They don't want us to figure out that we can be tolerant, that we can be friends. They like division. They literally sometimes make money off the fact that we are divided and we're fighting against each other. If you've ever watched cable news, you might recognize what I'm talking about. If you worry about trying to get the extremists to change their minds, you waste your breath. You need to focus on the middle 80% of America that actually is curious, wants to know what you're talking about, is willing to change their mind if you give them some new facts. But don't get derailed by the extremists. And believe me, they are very powerful and they will shut you down. And sometimes they don't even know they are being biased or shutting down conversation because you're not saying things the way they want you to say them. And that's a form of censorship that really kills our conversations. So I will let you, I'm going to go to the Q&A here in a moment, but I want to just leave you with the idea that if you get involved in these uncomfortable conversations, religion, race, ethnicity, ancestry, you name it, people that are issues people are tied to, it's not unicorns and rainbows. I mean, you are going to get called some nasty things. I mean, being called a traitor to my nation as a retired military officer was a very painful moment in my life, to have somebody say, you're a traitor to your uniform and your country. Why? Because I was talking about Islam and my Muslim friends. That will set off the extremists. So just know, you are going to get some hate mail and you just have to get used to it because they won't stop. They are invested in us not talking to each other. So we'll go to the next slide. These are some things I hope will help guide the Q&A. I'm sure you got a lot of questions, but on the last slide, you can see these are things that I think are helpful when you're trying to look at, if there's one more slide there, Ben, that you can get to. I hope it's on your slide deck. We missed it there, but I'll run through them. You know, yeah, think about what stereotyping mistakes that we make, phrases and words that we should or shouldn't be saying that are stopping bipartisan solutions, intolerant actions that we take. Think about the idea of getting politics out of it. So I'll let us pop into the Q&A, and I'm happy to take questions. Try to make them quick questions so we can get a lot, or type them in there. And if you want to make a comment on any of these, please be respectful of people's times. But I thank you for listening in, and I hope we maybe all learned something today.
Jason, I thought that was fantastic. I really appreciated those comments. I'm going to moderate the Q&A here, and all the Q&A is via chat, given our setup here, or people typing them in. So I'm just gonna read them. But so folks, just please use. We got a few people who've already sent in questions, been typing in questions. So I'm just going to go through them as quickly as I can. Please encourage you to use the Q&A button there at the bottom. Please feel free to keep typing them in. We'll get to as many as we can for Jason to answer. I'm going to jump right in here. Jason, first question is from Marshall Locke. He says, can you explain a viewpoint where some Muslims place more emphasis on or prioritize the latter verses in the Quran as being more important than or taking precedence over the earlier Quranic verses? Does that make sense?
Yep, totally understand the question. And I'll answer any question anybody has about Islam, but I'd also like us to talk about civility and how to speak better to each other, which applies to the larger issue here. So why do some people push to use later Quranic verses? And he's talking about chronologically later. The Quran is written over a 23-year time period. As I mentioned earlier, there are some very extreme groups in every religion. Islam, no different. There are people who want to push the idea that you use the parts of the Quran which cover the concept of war because it's written during a period of war, and use those as a important part of what you should teach people. There are folks that are invested, that are Muslim, that are invested in educating people about the most extreme or violent parts of the Quran. And that is an issue that Muslims around the world are grappling with. Saudi Arabia has actually admitted in 2016 and has been working on it since then, that they have been, they have themselves not been talking about Islam in a constructive way, and they're shifting to teach other parts of the Quran. So it's an issue. It is something that Muslims understand. Believe me, Muslims of every age and identity group understand it, and they are working to overcome it. So that's an important thing to understand. Some people are invested in pushing the worst of their own religion. So I think we've seen that in just about every religion. So.
Great. Thanks, Moshe, for the question. Thanks, Jason. I'm going to go to another question from Nick Vale. This one is more about Islam. I have a couple of others that have been sent in on the broader civility topic I'll get to in a second. This one from Nick, I'll just read it here. Where do you see trends in the world regarding increasingly strict adherence to Islam versus more progressive interpretations, or people adopting more of a, put in quotes, casual attachment to Islam? He asks, is there hope or data showing that younger generations in any particular countries are becoming more casual Muslims or even non-religious in a sense? Are people reducing the importance of, quote, Muslim as part of their identity in favor of, quote, humanist or, quote, non-religious? Thoughts on that, Jason?
Yeah, that's a great one. I talk about this a lot on my podcasts. I have people from all over the world that come in. Some are, very devout Muslims. Some, I had a lady from Australia who left Islam because her father was a very, very extreme person when it came to religion, and she actually had to leave the home, and she's out there in college age groups talking to people about why she couldn't stay in a religion that would allow somebody to be so strict about it. I've been in very strict churches in America. I've lived all over our country. I've seen lots of different religions that have very strict views. So I would say the youth in general, in every religion, and Islam is no exception, young people are moving away from the religion, and a lot of them are angry that their religions would push hate instead of love, to really simplify it. And I've seen that. I have discussions about religion all the time with people. I'm seeing it in all religions. So the young people who are computer savvy, have access to the internet, and can see what else is going on in the world. That's another large group that's moving away from religion. There are older people I meet who have moved away from it because they think it's been corrupted by people who are worried about all the wrong things in their religion. So I think this is a worldwide phenomenon of all religions. I'm seeing it in a big way. It's probably more urban than rural. More urban people are probably moving away from religion more. But even if they are becoming less religious, they're not getting rid of their religion. They're just not so worried about the devout side of it or the very strict commandments that their religion holds. So there is a big movement. I think it's more general to all human beings, not just Islam, but the same thing is happening in Islam.
Folks, please use the Q&A feature to throw in any more questions here. I'll go to the button at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to type in questions as folks have them. We had a few other that were sent in. This one's a little bit of both, the specific to religion and Islam and a broader question about civility. This is from Tom and Raleigh. He says, why don't students in the U.S. learn more about religion in schools? Wouldn't this promote more civility and understanding? What do you think about that, Jason?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a hunger for people to learn more about it. I was lucky. My mom was studying to be a nurse when I was in middle school, and she had a textbook from her nursing course on world religions. So I picked it up and thumbed through it because I like to read. So at middle school age, I was exposed to all the major world religions, but I didn't get it in school. And I think that's something we're missing. It's an easy button that would really solve a lot of problems if we just had a world religion course as one of the courses you take in either middle school or high school. It would help people to understand a lot of things. When I teach college courses and high school level courses, when I do guest lecturing, I always get questions about religion. People want to know about it. The difficulty, though, is finding unbiased teachers. And that is the conundrum that most schools will probably hit you with. I don't have anybody that could teach world religion in a way that would make it fair. If I let people who really want to do it teach it but aren't trained for it, I'm going to get 1,000 parent issues. The principal will be a very busy person trying to handle it. If you just try to insert it into your course as a teacher, And you don't do world religions. If you just do one religion and not another religion, you're opening another can of worms. And you see that all the time with people trying to put quizzes together for students, and that quiz goes home to the parents and they lose their mind. Why are you talking about religion? So you're going to get hit from the left and the right politically if you want more religion discussion in school. And it is just challenging to get the right people to teach it. But I think it's a valuable thing. I'd love to see more of it. I can't teach everywhere.
Thanks, Jason. Martha Whitlock just typed in a question. It's pretty broad, generic one here on the civility one, but allow you to kind of take it wherever you want to go. So Martha Whitlock says, what do you feel communities? What
did I lose you guys?
Oh, can you hear me, Jason?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, I lost you for a second. Broad question here from Martha Whitlock on the civility topic, sort of big picture, take it wherever you want to go. Is what do you feel communities can do to increase the civility of talking with those we don't understand or don't know how to approach them? So I guess this is a question, broader about communities, like what communities can actually do to encourage more civil dialogue on these issues.
It's tougher now with COVID, although we've all clearly found some solutions to that. I think the big issue is that communities need to be willing to open the doors to a building and get people to come together to talk about challenging issues. Most communities are afraid to do that. I have to get religious organizations to talk about religion is like twisting arms. It is so difficult to even get a church to have a discussion, or a synagogue or a temple. And when I tell them, yeah, I want to talk about Islam and other religions, and they're like, are you crazy? Although I've had some who love it. And when we did it, their congregation loves it. I always tell people, I think you're going to come out of any religious discussion stronger in your own faith than weaker. And I think that's what some people are worried about. Even with talking about religion in school, I don't want anybody to know there's other religions out there, but it covers all issues. When is the last time that a church, held a discussion about reducing violence during arrests in our community to make sure that the police and the communities that are feeling the violence in our during arrest procedures or not getting a fair shake when they go to court, where can they go to have a discussion that brings the community into it? Our communities are just afraid, and there's a lot of people out there that will come and silence you and will protest because they don't want you to talk. But I think that's where our communities are really weak. We're not leaning forward to gather people together and have a discussion that really makes change. We pay an expert to come in, he rattles on for a little while. We don't let him ask any questions because it might get uncomfortable. And then we say, we've done some great training on this tough issue. But that doesn't help. People need to have a conversation. They want the Q&A session. They want some banter back and forth. And they don't have to walk away with their mind changed, but we are just afraid to get into it. And it's getting harder. I think there's a lot more censorship today, and people just don't want to start these conversations because it seems painful. It seems hard. So just let it go and we won't get a lawsuit. And that's hurting us. It really is.
Michelle and Charlotte sent in a question. And I'm gonna build on it a little bit to clarify. So Michelle and Charlotte said, what can we do to promote a better understanding of religion other than our own? Michelle sent it in, so I can't ask her what she specifically meant by that, but I'll expand. I guess meaning's at the individual level here, Jason. I mean, basically it's what can an individual do, right, to promote a better understanding of religion other than the one that they have?
I think the first thing is self-education. If you don't understand a religion, there are plenty of books out there. I would highly recommend the book Holy Envy, written by Barbara Taylor, and we can email that one out. I found that book to be really good. She is a world religion teacher. She teaches multiple religion courses, and she did it in the Atlanta area. She went and visited. I think if you don't understand religions, go to other religious ceremony. As a soldier, I was all over the world. So there wasn't my local Baptist church. I would go to Catholic, I would go to Hindu temples, I've been to mosque, whatever was the religion I could get to pray once a week, I would go take part in that ceremony. You bring your own God with you, right? So I think we have to take the fear away from learning about somebody else and meeting somebody who does something different than us. And it's about self-study. You have to be motivated to learn yourself. Once you've studied, you can talk to other people about it. I've done dinner party discussions where I just go over, there's 8 guys sitting around a table and we're talking about Islam for the evening. Just 2 hours of a friendly discussion. And if you open that up and you start to think that way, you can make a difference. The Rotary Club has been a really curious group. I have done a lot of Rotary clubs around our country. So you have to find organizations that are willing to have a conversation. They're not afraid of conversations. And then we need to know what we're talking about, or find somebody who does, and just have conversations. You have to start talking. Going behind the walls and throwing rocks at each other doesn't help in any tough conversation.
In the time we have left, anyone else has more questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A and we'll get to them. I think I have one others that sent one in, but I'll throw one in myself here. Jason, I was thinking about this as you were saying about what communities can do answer a few minutes ago. I'm curious on your work on this and really trying to engage in difficult conversations with people. How has the last 4 months in this pandemic world impacted your ability to do this? I mean, have you been doing more virtual sort of sessions like this? And how does that frankly impact the ability to have some tough conversations? We were all getting used to this Zoom environment, but it's not the same, we know, right? But I'm curious what you've been doing there and any strategies you've found useful to kind of really connect with people in this more virtual environment.
Yeah, this is harder. I don't mind the virtual stuff and I do it, but it's very challenging. You can't read the room. You can't see what people's faces look like. You can't see somebody turn red when they're angry, or, start shaking their head when they agree. You can't see the whole room. You don't have a lot of conversations afterwards. There's no time to, a lot of my meetings are over meals, or there's, drinks afterwards. There's a moment where we can sit and talk afterwards. So you lose all that capability. And I think in person is best for these kind of tough conversations, but you can do it online and in these virtual areas. I think you have to get used to that. I like that about my podcast. I actually brought in guests from around the world. So I would get perspectives from people in Oklahoma. I would get perspectives from Australia, from New Jersey, you name it. And that made it even more fun. So that's one of the benefits of doing a lot of this stuff online and through the internet. You can really reach out and touch people all around the world. I get emails from people in Indonesia and Malaysia. I listen to your podcast. I really appreciated it. UAE, somebody was telling me, hey, I got your Quran. I'm in the United Arab Emirates, but my kids don't speak Arabic. So we use your English version to teach them Islam. And so the internet is great and it opens a lot of doors. But when it's a really tough conversation, live is the best for me. I think you make more impact.
Right, for sure. Martha Whitlock, who asked a question before, just had a follow-up simple question. I mean, do you only talk about Islam religion at your meetings and your talk?
If the specific topic is Islam, I mostly am explaining Islam. But when I look at the audience, I always judge, all right, is this audience, I can usually figure it out. Is it majority Christian? Are there a lot of Jewish people in here? Are there Hindus in here? Are there any Muslims in the room? So I know what else I can throw in there. I was raised, as a Baptist, so I understand a lot of analogies I can use to help people understand Islam by explaining another part of the Bible. Tell them about a story they've heard. So I talk a lot actually about Christianity, a little bit about Judaism. I don't get into many other religions because I'm not an expert in them. So it is majority Islam, but I'll use examples from Christianity to help people understand it, because that's a language I think most people can speak in America. When you go overseas, different story, but that's how I touch on different religions.
Okay, we'll get close to wrapping up here. If anyone else has a Q&A, feel free to type it in. This one actually, it's not fully written out to get the full purpose of the question here. It kind of builds on a little bit what you were just saying, actually. Sarah sent in a question, said, how do other religions fit into this conversation? Judaism also ? Now, I'm not sure exactly what she meant there about fitting into this conversation. I guess I'll let you take that wherever you want here, Jason. I mean, do you sense from your work on this, either how other religions tend to kind of come into your conversations that you're having, that's one way you could take that, or how you see similar types of conversations taking place about these other religions? I guess could be a different way of putting that question too. Any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, absolutely. I talk about this a lot with my Muslim friends around the world. So what I'm doing here, I am a Christian military retired officer who understands the religion very well. I spent half my life studying this religion, and I'm out explaining to mostly Christians and Jewish people what this religion is. And I always ask my Muslim friends, so how many Muslims do you know that have spent their whole, half their life studying Judaism and are out explaining Judaism to their Muslim friends? And usually the answer is, yeah, no one's going to do that. So I think that's where other religions fit into this. Every once in a while, I just met a gentleman the other day. I'll be speaking on maybe I already did his show, but he was a Muslim living in Israel, and he was explaining Judaism to the other Muslims that live there. That was something just like I fell into this. He kind of fell into that. He understood the religion. He could talk about it. And he said it was the weirdest feeling, which we knew exactly what each other were talking about. It's just a rare thing. We are unicorns. There are not a lot of people out there that have studied another religion and go tell their own co-religionists about it. But you are the best messenger to do that. And I think that fits for a lot of other topics. You have that ability. If you were a police officer and you can go explain the struggles that are going on in the Black community in Chicago to law enforcement agents in Minnesota and Texas and California, guess what? Those law enforcement agencies will listen to you because you're a law enforcer. So we have to look at who the right messenger is. I think other religions have a lot of ground to catch up on, and I would definitely not say that Christians are doing that hot of a job on this either. There are not a lot of people doing what I'm doing. But I think if you're going to get the right audience in the room and you're going to send the right messenger to speak to that audience, we need to start looking at who we are listening to and who we're not listening to, because we're missing a big part of the bridge here.
Nick Bale just typed in another question. What are some of your most effective strategies and tactics you have found that put people most at ease and more comfortable and civil in being able to have a sensitive conversation around religion? So I guess on specific, tactics and strategies that you use to do that, Jason.
Number one, don't be biased. And it's hard to do if you're really attached to the issue. But if you can walk in and just like I judge debates at high school and middle school, just like a good debate student, if you can walk in there and both sides of the argument perfectly, you'll win the debate because you can explain both sides of the argument and tell people why one is good or not. When I say don't be biased, you need to understand all the issues and questions surrounding the topic, but then don't try to convince anybody to go with your view. You have to give a presentation that doesn't have a view. That's just a presentation that would make the left, the right, the center. There's something in there that makes everybody go, yeah, he agrees with me, but you don't agree with any of them. And that is hard to do. I find the easiest way to get through that, you better insert a lot of humor into what you're talking about. Because if you can't get people to laugh, I think that most of them will stone you by the end of an hour. So I use a lot of humor and I work really hard to be as unbiased as I can. And you can't take it all out, and no one's perfect. But if that's your goal, and I love it when people come up to me after my talks and say, well, what do you really personally feel about this? I couldn't tell. Perfect. And that tells you've done it right. If people walk up to you and go, yeah, you're on my team, I know you're with me, or I hate you, you're not on my team, then you gave away a little bit too much of your own personal feelings. So I think humor and unbiased nature is the way to do it. And the other one is to get in front of the right audience. If you're talking to a bunch of people that agree with you, you're in the wrong room. And maybe everybody that's on here today agrees with what we're saying about civility. I'm in the wrong room. I like to be in a place where people don't agree with me, and I want them to challenge their own thoughts and their thinking, because that's the mind you need to change. I probably didn't change anybody's mind in here today, which means I'm in the wrong room, if that makes sense.
Indeed. Well, we're going to get close to wrapping up here. Stella, I don't know if you had any kind of wrap up thoughts, questions, or comments before we kind of allow Jason to wrap us up here too. Stella, I think you're on mute there.
I just want to thank Jason for this powerful presentation. And as someone who has self-studied and tried to learn these various religions and their connectivity, I'm just so happy to have you share your vision, your thoughts and your process with the people of North Carolina around civility and tolerance and hopefully acceptance of each other once we know each other. This was a very powerful hour, and I want to thank FixUS and the people at, who made this possible. And I'm going to turn it over to Jason to say a final word. We are so proud to have you. And I want to say to the audience, look forward to the third. This is going to continue. We're going to continue to have these tough conversations. And so there will be a third episode in our series and hopefully more. Again, Jason, thank you so much. And please share with us your final thoughts.
Thanks, Stella, for having me on. Thanks, FixUS. Thanks, AT&T, and your weak phone signal for not dropping out on us. So I was able to hear everybody, and hopefully you heard me. I leave you with 3 questions. I think if you want to engage in conversation with an audience that may not agree with you, if you can think of these 3 things before you do it or as you prepare, is can I unite everybody when I speak? Can I reach this entire audience in a way that makes them go, okay, we may not all agree, but we can be united that there needs to be a solution. And there's a lot of ways to get there. Number 2, can I be unbiased? Can I get into this conversation and not tell people this is what I think, and if you don't think like me, then you're wrong? Because of course, you know, we're not going to move the ball forward. And then the last one, can I get the right audience to listen to me? Because if you're sitting in a room and you're only speaking to people that agree completely with what you're saying, I tell you, you're in the wrong room. And when I tell interfaith people this, they lose their minds. They're like, but no one else will hear me. I said, then we're not doing our jobs. We have got to get in the audience that disagrees with us and have a discussion, because otherwise no one ever changes their mind. And I think that's where we're kind of stuck in America. Everybody's off in their corner, screaming at the top of their lungs to a bunch of people who already agree with them. You know, if as an interfaith person, I shouldn't walk in a room where all the bumper stickers are coexist bumper stickers outside. I'm in the wrong room. They already agree with me. I don't need to tell them anything. And so I think that has got to be your number one thing to think about. Am I talking to the right people? And am I saying in a way that makes them listen? Because we can walk out educated and tolerant of each other and become friends. We just changed minds. And so that's a useful one. And I thought of one more technique specific, and I love to use this one, and I came up with it in Afghanistan. I say that food is a weapon of peace. Yes. If you have a meal with the people you're talking to, whether it's a potluck or a small dinner, if you're talking over food, you are going to change minds. There is something magical about having food and drink while you're having a discussion that lets everybody let their guard down, and they will listen more. And it's every human being in the world is trained this way. If someone brings in food or drink, we need to be nice to each other. And so I would tell you, have every discussion you can over a meal or with food.
Good point.
I'm looking forward to the day when we can all have more meals together. Let's put it that way. Jason, I'll close wrap here real quick by just thanking you also. And that was a great last message there to leave us on and sort of give us a charge to kind of work on for sure. And Stella, as always, thank you so much for your work and helping us on this. And for everyone joining, thank you also, and look forward to continuing these conversations for sure. So with that, bid everyone a nice day, afternoon, and take care.